Hello. Today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going through Letterboxd's official top 250 narrative feature films. I am a Letterboxd member, and what the point of this video is just for me to kind of go through the movies and talk about the ones that I've seen. I haven't seen all 250, but I think I've seen quite a few. And I'm just going to give you my thoughts and input on each movie. I guess the point of this is to just kind of like give people a little window into me and the types of movies that I'm interested in, and I guess like my taste in cinema. I am a Letterboxd member, and I post a lot. I post on pretty much every movie that I watch, so you can follow me, and there's going to be a link below. And I am also a contributing writer to Film Inquiry. I've written a few articles so far. I'm trying to write more. So if you like what you see and you want to follow more of my writing, you can. I'll put a link below, a link to my Film Inquiry profile. This is sort of in response to another film YouTuber who what he did was he went through IMDb's top 250. I'm not a huge fan of that list. I much prefer the Letterboxd list. I think that the people who use Letterboxd have a lot more insight and are a lot more film savvy and than the average IMDb user. I actually don't even know anyone who has an IMDb account. But yeah, so I trust Letterboxd. I trust their top 250 list a lot more. It's not a perfect list, but nothing is perfect, and this is all subjective. So yeah, I'm just gonna go through it. I don't know if I'm going to go through all 250 today. I might break this up. We'll just see as we go along. But the video I saw on YouTube that went through the top 250 IMDb, that video was about 5 hours long. Now, I'm hoping to bang this out in like under 2 hours, but we'll see. I don't know. Also, if you can't tell, I have really terrible AV equipment. So sorry if the audio is not going to be great. But sorry. Yeah. And then also another thing that I wanted to mention was that I am probably going to mispronounce a ton of names. So I apologize in advance. I try to learn these names. God knows I try. But yeah, let's get into it. This is Letterboxd's top 250 narrative feature films. Also, it changes periodically, and this is going off of I'm recording this in May of 2023, so it could change. Changes quite a bit. And also what I'm gonna do is because I don't know, I think I want to jump right into the more exciting parts of the list. So I'm going to start at the top of the list. I am not going to start at 250 and work my way up. I'm gonna start at the top, work my way down. I would think I've seen more films closer to the top, but let's find out. I haven't seen the list in a while. Okay, so starting off at number one, and that is Come and See, from 1985 by Klimov. Yeah, I think this is an acceptable answer to what is the greatest film of all time. It's, again, not my personal pick. I don't even think it would go in my top 10, but yeah, I think, it's exceptionally well made. It takes on a subject matter that should be kind of impossible to take on. It does it brilliantly. Interestingly enough, I haven't seen any other Klimov film. I would like to, but this is the only one I've seen. I hear some of his other work is also pretty good. This was his last movie. He decided to retire after making this. I also think it's appropriate for a website like Letterboxd to have Come and See in the top as their number one, because this was a film that I feel that that the internet kind of uncovered. It came out in 1985, but it didn't get a wide release. I don't really know if it even left Russia. Maybe it played at a few places across Europe, but like it really didn't come to the United States. Most of the early reviews that you'll see of this movie from like top film critics came out decades after its release, so it took the rest of the world a while to find this movie. And yeah, I don't have too much to say about it that nobody else has said, but yeah, again, it's not my pick, but I think it's an acceptable answer for number one. There have been other movies to hit number one on the top 250 that I don't find to be acceptable answers, but this one I'm okay with. Okay, moving on. Number two was Parasite from 2019. I think all of us are pretty familiar with this movie. Again, I think it's a great film. I think it's a masterpiece. There's just so much great stuff right now coming out of South Korea, like still consistently coming out of South Korea. And yeah, this is obviously, I don't know if it's my favorite South Korean film. That might have to go to Oldboy, which we'll probably get to eventually. But again, it's so exceptionally well made. Everything about it is brilliant. I still remember seeing this in theaters and just being like totally rocked by it. And again, it wouldn't be in my even top 10, but maybe top 100, and I think that's a fine answer for number two. Okay, now we're going on to number three, and I was curious how long it would take to get to a movie that I have not seen before. That didn't take long. So number three is I believe it's a Mexican film. It's called A Dog's Will. That's number three. It's from 2000. Not going to attempt to pronounce the director's name. Yeah, I'm not sure. I believe this is a Mexican film. This is an interesting number three because I don't think... You never hear anyone talk about this movie, and I don't even think I know anyone who's seen it. Most of the people who I follow on Letterboxd actually don't like this movie. I've seen a lot of negative reviews from the people I follow, or they either feel that it's an overrated film, but it's got a 4.6. It's number three. It's also one of the reasons why I probably haven't seen it yet is because it's not readily available. It's not streaming on any platforms, and I think you have to like buy the DVD, and I'm sure it's very overpriced, or you can just stream it, however you stream movies illegally. Yeah, and the director's not that famous, but this is number three. A while back when I first started looking at this list, I saw that this movie was number three, and I did some research on what's it about, who's in it, why have I not heard of it, and the review I read gave off the impression that this is one of those films where, I believe it's a Mexican film, it's sort of one of those movies that like maybe you have to have grown up in that culture to really understand it and appreciate it. It's one of those things where it's like people from other cultures might not like it as much. I believe it's a comedy, and so they might not get the jokes. I mean, I have mixed feelings about that theory, even though I haven't seen it. But like, I mean, Parasite is a South Korean film, and the whole world seemed to love that movie. So I don't know. That makes it kind of, I don't know how I feel about that. But I haven't seen it, and one of my golden rules is to not pass any judgment on a film I have not seen. So I'm just gonna move on. Number four is a great movie. Harakiri. God, I hope I said that right. But it's the 1962 film directed by Kobayashi, who, I mean, when a lot of people talk about Japanese cinema, they obviously go to Kurosawa, who I love Kurosawa, and we're going to talk about some of his movies later on too. But Kobayashi I put right up there with Kurosawa. He, I mean, again, there was just... Throughout the late 50s and then all throughout the 1960s, there was a real renaissance in Japan, where just brilliant filmmakers were just pumping out masterpiece after masterpiece after masterpiece, and this is certainly one of them. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Japanese film from this kind of golden era of Japanese cinema, but it's got a fantastic lead performance by Tatsu Nakadai, who I think is one of the greatest film actors to ever live. And I say live because he's still alive. I don't think he's working quite as much. He's very old by this point. But if you go through a lot of these Japanese films from this time period, he was in a number of them. And he was also, he was often the lead. And I just recently watched for the first time The Sword of Doom, where he gives a phenomenal performance. I mean, the things he can do with his face, the way he contorts it, and in that movie, he just embodies evil. In this movie, I mean, he does give a brilliant performance, but also just like the story structure is genius. It's got so many twists and turns in the narrative. Yeah, it might be my favorite Kobayashi movie. Um, I mean, yeah, hold on. Let me make this. I don't want this to zoom out on me. There we go. Still recording? Still recording. This might be my favorite Kobayashi movie. Okay, then this is interesting. So moving on to number 5. Well, we'll talk about 5 and 6, I guess, together, because number 5 is The Godfather Part 2. This is the first American film so far on the list. And yeah, Part 2. So Part 2 is higher than Part 1. Part 1 is number 6. The Godfather Part 2 is number 5. Obviously, these were both directed by Francis Ford Coppola. I think we're all pretty familiar with these movies. So I think, you know, you're comparing two masterpieces here, so it's kind of tricky. You're comparing two like 10 out of 10 films made by a brilliant director at like the peak of his power. But I gotta say, I really prefer Part 1. I would think most of the world would prefer Part 1. Part 1 is definitely a lot more iconic. It has a lot more memorable moments. I mean, yeah, Part 1 I think is definitely better. But again, Part 2 is, nothing against Part 2. They're both equally great. But the thing about Part 2, and it's been actually a really long time since I've seen Part 2. I've only seen Part 2 from start to finish once. And it was a very long time ago. It was probably 10 years ago now. And Part 1 I've seen from start to finish a few times. But the thing about Part 2 is I only really remember the flashbacks with Marlon Brando as Don back in Italy. And then he, as a little boy, he goes to New York City. And then he slowly climbs the ladder to be the head of the New York Mafia. And then, there's this second half of the movie that takes place in, I think, the 1950s, and it's all about Michael going on trial, and I think he has to testify in front of Congress. I don't remember that part of the film that well. I can't even really tell you what that half of the movie is about. I certainly remember the half with Marlon Brando, the flashback sequences, especially that amazing sequence where he assassinates that man in the white coat. He sneaks into the hallway and shoots him. I guess that's a spoiler alert, sorry. Yeah, I can't even tell you what the other half is about. I remember liking it, but it's just not as memorable, not as iconic. Again, moving on to the number 6 spot, The Godfather Part 1. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a superior film. They're both great, but Part 1's gotta be better, in my book at least. And then again, I don't have a whole lot to say about this movie because what hasn't been said. Everyone in it is brilliant. My favorite performance in the movie is Al Pacino. That might be an unpopular opinion. I think most people would go with Brando or James Caan. James Caan's really good in this, but everyone's great in this movie. There's not a bad performance. There's not a bad scene. There's not a bad moment, I don't think. Okay, let's move on. Number 7, and we have a film that I'm surprised is this high up. This is another Kobayashi film. So two Kobayashi films before we even get to our first Kurosawa movie. I think that says something. And this is from 1961 by Kobayashi, The Human Condition 3, A Soldier's Prayer. So, yeah, Kobayashi, I think in the late 50s, or I guess 1961 is when this came out, he adapted a very famous Japanese novel called The Human Condition. It's huge. And what he did was he turned it into 3 films. I actually think maybe originally it was going to be like a mini-series. Maybe it premiered as a mini-series. I'm not quite sure. If you watch the movies, they have intermissions. So, I mean, a lot of movies back then had intermissions, but it kind of feels like each one is its own little, episode in a series. But they work quite well as films, too. I watched these a couple of years back in college because I had heard about them, and I was just starting to get into Kobayashi, and I thought this would be a great way to break into his filmography. Again, it stars one of the great actors, Tatsu Nakadai. He's fantastic in this. So it's interesting that the highest ranked one is The Human Condition Part 3. This is the third and final movie. I like these movies a lot. I wouldn't call them masterpieces. In fact, this is the first film on this list that I've seen that I would say is a very, very good movie, but not quite a masterpiece, not a 10 out of 10 for me. But, they're great, epic pieces of cinema. From my recollection, again, I'm a little foggy in the details, I really liked part one. I thought part one was hands down the best of the three films. In fact, my least favorite, they kind of declined in quality for me. My least favorite of the three would be this one, would be part three. The only thing I really remember about this movie is that he's at war. It's set during World War II. They're fighting off the Russians, and the main character, played by Tatsu, it's him out in the wilderness for a really long time, and it's him kind of struggling to survive. I don't even remember, I think I remember how it ends, but I think part one was the better of the three. We're gonna move on. Number 8. Okay, number 8, we have another American film, and this is, again, another movie that I like a lot. It's 12 Angry Men by Sidney Lumet. Sidney Lumet was, one of the great American directors. So it's nice to see one of his movies this high up. I would not pick this one. I would go with Dog Day Afternoon. I hope Dog Day Afternoon is somewhere on this 250 list. But yeah, people love this movie, and I think it's a very, very good film. Again, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember some of the performances. Most of the performances are excellent. Obviously stars... Who does it star? Fonda, right? Henry Fonda, who's very good. No, it's a good movie, a very iconic film too. I think it summed up the American spirit in the 1950s pretty well. Not my favorite Sidney Lumet by miles, but it's a good one. Okay, moving on. And now, so we're getting to, this is another Japanese film. So in the top 10, we have three Japanese films from this golden age of Japanese cinema. That says a lot right there. And this is, number 9 is Seven Samurai by Kurosawa. This is from 1954. This is also the first Japanese film on the list to not... Well, actually, it's the first Japanese film to not star Tatsu Nakadai. But Tatsu Nakadai actually is in this movie. He's an extra. And I'm not even sure exactly who he is. If I watched the movie now, I couldn't tell you. But he is in this movie. So Tatsu Nakadai is in 3. Technically, he's in 3 of the top 10 films. I think that's rather appropriate. He was a fantastic actor. And he was in the right place at the right time. We'll say that. Because he was a young leading man in the 1960s Japan. So perfect timing. Okay, so Seven Samurai. Again, I hate to say it, but my memory... of this film is a little foggy. It's been a long time since I've seen this movie. This might have been the first Japanese film from this era that I've seen. I think it was the first Kurosawa film, or the first or second Kurosawa film that I ever saw. Maybe second. It's a good... I would have to rewatch it. I want to rewatch this movie really badly because I don't have that very clear memory of it. I liked the movie. I wouldn't call it a great film. I wouldn't say it's one of the best films I've ever seen. I don't even think it's like in the top 10 Japanese films from this time period. I think there are multiple, even Kurosawa films that I think are far, far better. One thing I remember thinking about this movie when I first saw it was that, I saw this movie when I was like in high school. I was really young. I didn't know a lot about world cinema. And I thought, okay, cool, it's a samurai film. That'll be cool. I love Kung Fu. Well, Kung Fu is Chinese and samurais are Japanese. But I thought it would be like a Kung Fu movie, like a Jackie Chan film. I thought it would be like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I thought there'd be like really cool, awesome fight scenes in it. And some of those old samurai films do have really fantastic fight scenes. Seven Samurai does not. It has a few battle scenes with like guys on horses like kind of fighting each other, but there's no kung fu in the movie. And so I remember 17-year-old me was maybe a little disappointed that there wasn't any kung fu fighting. So that was my big critique when I was like 17. I want to rewatch Seven Samurai because I bet I would appreciate it a lot more if I saw it today. Okay, and then number 10, we have another American film. And this is a movie that, and I think we're going to I'm gonna bump into a lot of these types of films. It's an American film that I think is good. I think it's a strong movie. There's a lot I like about it. I just don't think it's a masterpiece. I don't think it's one of the greatest films ever made. So number 10 is The Shawshank Redemption from 1994. Frank Darabont. I mean, not a great director in my opinion. I've seen a couple of his other movies. Definitely not in the conversation of the great American filmmakers the way Coppola and Sidney Lumet are in that conversation. But and I also just, I don't know, I don't like a lot of prison movies. Maybe that's just a personal thing. But there's a lot of great stuff about this film. Morgan Freeman's excellent in it. Tim Robbins is also very good. The guy who voices Mr. Crab is in this movie. Clancy Brown, I guess is his name. Plenty of good acting, plenty of great performances. I think the ending is fine. I don't think it's quite as triumphant as it wants to be. I mean, it's a good movie. I'm not trying to knock it or anything. I just and I believe this is IMDb's number 1. So that, I think, right there says a little bit about the differences between that list and this list. I think Come and See is a much better answer for number 1. Let's move on. Okay, number 11. This is a movie that I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, but I like it a lot more than Shawshank Redemption. Number 11 is Spirited Away. Often considered the greatest anime film ever made. This is also the first animated film on the list. I just saw this movie for the first time, God, maybe like a year ago. I'm pretty late to Miyazaki. I've only seen a handful of his films, and I suppose it's my favorite Miyazaki movie. I also really like, what's that other film of his called that I like a lot? Howl's Moving Castle. I actually think Howl's Moving Castle might be a better film. Although I like this one. I don't have a ton to say about it, although it looks great and the story is very imaginative, and I actually do like a lot of the voice acting in it too. I think I listened to the version with English dubs. Don't hate me. But no, a fine answer. I wouldn't have it on my top 25, but there you go. Number 12 is another movie. This one's a little bit of a head scratcher for me. Number 12 is Central Station by Walter Sales. I'm probably saying that wrong. This is, God, I hope I get this right, a Brazilian film. Yeah, this is a Brazilian film by Walter Sales. Also, again, in my opinion, I've only seen one other film of his, and that was On the Road, which was not a very good movie. So not a great director, in my opinion, but, sometimes just okay directors can make brilliant films. It doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen. I don't think this is a brilliant film. I liked it a lot. I think, for me, it's like a very by-the-books, like heartfelt. The story is rather formulaic, and it's kind of by-the-books, feel-good movies about two, sort of like an Odd Couple thing, where you have like this older woman and this younger boy, and like, they shouldn't get along, they shouldn't be friends, but they're kind of forced to go on this road trip together. They're looking for the boy's family. She's trying to help the little boy find his family. It's really interesting because this film came out in 1998. It's an international film. And, okay, so it's about like this little boy who, I guess he's sort of like a refugee. He's homeless. He's looking for his parents. She ends up going on this journey with him to kind of help him find his family, who he's been separated from. And so, she's older and he's younger, and it's about like these two different generations kind of like coming together and finding some kind of peace with each other. This same year, 1998, a amazing Greek film came out. I don't want to say too much about it now because I think we're going to talk about it later. It's a Greek film from a Greek filmmaker named Theo Angelopoulos, who I wrote an article about Theo Angelopoulos not too long ago. It was published on Film Inquiry, where I just went through his filmography. He was this, if you don't know who that is, Theo Angelopoulos was this brilliant, very underrated Greek filmmaker. I think one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. He's certainly the greatest filmmaker who not a lot of people know his name. He won several awards at like Cannes and other big film festivals, but he made a 1998 film called Eternity in a Day, which is about an older dying man living in Greece who meets a young homeless refugee boy, and it's about the two of them, and they end up going kind of on this like journey together, and there are some striking similarities in like the thematically between these two films. And Eternity in a Day, I mean, that film, I absolutely love that movie. That's one of my favorite films of all time. It's unfortunately really hard to track down. I had to buy a DVD box set of a bunch of Theo Angelopoulos movies, just to watch that and a couple of his other films. It's not streaming on any major service at the time. Hopefully that might change the next couple of years. I would love for Criterion to do a box set of his movies, but I think this other company owns the rights to his films. But if you, yeah, we're gonna get to Theo later because he has a number of films on this list. But yeah, number 12 is Central Station. It's still a good movie. I kind of feel this way about how I feel about Shawshank Redemption. It's quite good. I don't think it's anywhere near. I wouldn't never use the word brilliant or masterpiece to describe it, but it's a good movie. Pretty formulaic. I'd say it's so far the most formulaic film on this list. Okay, number 13 is another Kurosawa film. We're going to get a lot of these, and this is a Kurosawa film that I do think is a masterpiece. I absolutely love this movie. This is one of my favorite Japanese films. Probably my second favorite Kurosawa film. That's High and Low. So Kurosawa made two different types of movies. He made movies that were all set in Japan that took place a long time ago and were really about samurais. So, you know, samurais, either their culture or their feuding. Obviously, Seven Samurai and movies like Yojimbo fall into that category. That's what he's more known for. Movies also like Ran. He's more remembered for those films, and I like a lot of those movies. But then he would also do films. So if one film is about samurais, the other one is about just like Japanese men in business suits. That's what I call them, because they're all about these really unhappy or just like complex Japanese men, and they're always in business suits, and they're dealing with the things that Japanese men in business suits deal with. So a great example of this would be High and Low, what's it called? Only the Bad Sleep Well, I believe is the other one. And yeah, these are more, some of them are rough adaptations of Shakespeare plays. Some of them, though, are very original. This is a film about a kidnapping. I guess it's technically a police thriller. Yeah, Nagadai is in this. He plays the chief detective. It's about a little boy who gets kidnapped, but the kidnappers kind of kidnap the wrong kid. Instead of kidnapping the son of this wealthy businessman, they kidnap his, like, gardener's son. And then there's kind of this moral conflict of, how much money and effort will this man put into rescuing his gardener's son when the kidnappers meant to kidnap his son. It's really, really, again, just exceptionally well made, very well shot, very tense, a real cat and mouse thriller, but with just like a lot of emotion packed into it. I mean, again, I have to rewatch Seven Samurai, but I think this film is miles better. Yeah, again, this is just like Japanese filmmaking at its absolute peak. Okay, and then number 4, we have another foreign film. This is City of God. I love this movie. I think this is one of the best films of the 2000s. Yeah, certainly one of the best movies ever made. I saw this movie, I guess, for the first time in college. I think I saw it in a film class. Interestingly enough, the director of this film, he's done a few other projects since. He's not a very consistent filmmaker, but I've seen this and The Two Popes. So he really broke through with this movie. The Two Popes was, fine. But this is an exceptional film. I think a good way to sum the movie up is that it is kind of Brazil's answer to Goodfellas. It's about organized crime in, I believe, Rio. Yeah. I think it's set in Rio. It's about this young boy coming of age in this in kind of the ghettos of this big Brazilian city. It's about like him, and the antagonist of this movie is one of the meanest and nastiest antagonists. You know, when they do all those lists online of like top 50 movie villains, you never see the bad guy from City of God on that list, and he would be like way up at the top of my list. He's like the worst, just one of the worst characters ever put on film. The things he does are just appalling. And it's very fast paced, and it packs a lot into 2 hours. And I'm not overly familiar with Brazilian cinema, but this is, I think, the best Brazilian film I've seen. Interestingly enough, yeah, it's Central Stations. We've got 2 Brazilian films on the list so far. Okay, number 15 is a movie that I do really like. I don't think it belongs to be this high up, but number 15 is The Dark Knight by Christopher Nolan. I mean, yeah, I love this movie. I think this is like the ultimate blockbuster from this time period. I think years from now, when historians look back on action films from the 2000s, I think this is going to be like the movie that just like captured the post 9/11 attitudes that and style that went into the action film genre. It's also, I think, the peak of superhero movies. I think there's been quite a decline recently in superhero films. In fact, we're going to get to that next. But this was back when people were still putting a lot of time and a lot of, real thought and effort. Maybe time wasn't the right word, but thought and effort into a superhero blockbuster. And also, I know some people didn't love Christian Bale's portrayal of Batman. I actually thought it was quite good. Also, of course, Heath Ledger as the Joker. Talk about bad guys. Talk about some of the great movie bad guys of all time. It's a really brilliant performance, and I don't typically go gaga over a lot of superhero movies. I think there's a lot more bad and good in most of them, but this is certainly the best superhero movie. Again, probably the best like action blockbuster from this time period. And I saw this. I think I've seen this movie because it came out when I was like in middle school, and I was a huge Batman fan for such a long time. So I think I saw this movie either 3 or 4 times in cinema. I want to say 3 to be safe, but I saw this movie 3 times in the cinema. And that's probably the only movie that I've seen 3 times in a movie theater. And then 16, kind of the other side of the coin, we have Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Well, I watched this movie actually just maybe a year or so ago because it was on Netflix, so I didn't have to pay. And just, it's number 16, and I wanted to see, hey, people seem to really love this movie. It's very high up on Letterboxd's list, so let's give it a watch. I went into this not loving Spider-Man as much as I love Batman. Batman just meant a lot to me growing up. Spider-Man, not so much. It's fine. It's a good movie. It's fine. I laughed a lot more than I thought I would. I think especially at John Mulaney's Pig Spider-Man, whatever that was, or Ham Man, whatever. I certainly don't see what makes it so great. And I haven't even seen any of the other, like, Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. I enjoyed the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. It's a perfectly fine movie. My friends who are maybe more into superheroes than I am went really gaga over this. I did not. Okay, number 17. This is an interesting one. This is Yi Yi by Edward Yang. Came out in 2000. So this is considered Edward Yang's best film. I really like Edward Yang. I like this movie a lot. I think it's definitely one of the best films. On my Letterboxd, if you want to check it out, I have a ranking of my favorite movies from each year. And this is not high up on my list of my favorites from 2000, but it's his last movie. He certainly went out on a bang. Um, it's like it's just a really well made drama about this family, and there's something really interesting going on with each member of the family, and it tackles some really deep and universal themes in a really well way. Um, it's not my favorite Edward Yang. I actually recently I've been going through his entire filmography, and he was a great filmmaker. God, I think we lost him way too soon. But thankfully, he gave us about I think a maybe 10 or so, or maybe a little less than 10 feature films. I haven't seen all 10. His early work, I think, was really great. He's one of those guys who just like hit the ground running. His very first movie is really good. He made a film called Topai Story. I hope I'm saying that right, or maybe Topay Story. That I think that's his best film. He also did another film called Terrorizers, which is also just fantastic. I wouldn't put Yi Yi as high as those other movies, but it's kind of his magnum opus. It's again his last film, and if you just want to understand what kind of filmmaker he is and what he's all about, watch this movie because it kind of has everything in it you would want from an Edward Yang film. It looks great. The acting is very good. It's a good movie. I wouldn't call it a brilliant film. It's certainly not his best movie. Okay, number 18. We have Goodfellas. Now, I agree. I think this film totally deserves to be this high up. This is hands down Martin Scorsese's best movie. And he's made a lot of really good movies. I think it's like, I don't know, is it better than The Godfather? That's really, really tough. But I think it's such a masterpiece, and it's certainly one of the best gangster films. I've seen this movie multiple times, and also another thing about me, like I don't like to rewatch movies over and over and over again. I like to watch a movie once, maybe twice. Goodfellas you can watch a couple of times because there's so much in it. I mean, what Martin Scorsese did with Goodfellas is that he really managed to make a movie that feels like a novel. And obviously it's adapted from a novel, and there's so much in there that there's so much in there. It has the level of details that you would get from a text, which you normally don't get in film. Yeah, and of course, like this, the needle drops are amazing, and all the acting. You know, we lost Ray Liotta recently, and he's so good in this. And also, you know, people talk about his performance and Joe Pesci's performance. It's all brilliant, but like even Robert De Niro is just like brilliant in this. And what's that actress's name? Lorraine Bracco, I think that's how you say it. She's great. Karen Hill, what a character. She's so brilliant in this. One of the best films of the 90s. I think this was actually Roger Ebert's favorite film of the 90s. Not my favorite film of the 90s, but it's up there. So I approve of this being so high. 19 is Schindler's List. We go from Scorsese to Spielberg. Again, a very ambitious film on Spielberg's part. I know some people have a lot of problems with this movie. I think we've all seen that video of Terry Gilliam really going after this movie. I don't know. I think the arguments are fair. I understand people's point of view who don't like this movie. I think it's an excellent film. I think it looks great. I think the acting's great. It's also, he does this thing where very few films do it well, where you take an incredibly difficult subject matter, a subject matter that you think would be like impossible to cover and like do justice to, and that of course is the Holocaust, and he manages to make a movie about it that it's not so unbearable that you can't watch it. Like I think some films that cover these subject matters, they're just so unbearable to sit through. It just like actually kind of like hurts to watch some of this stuff, but he makes it bearable to watch depictions of genocide and the Holocaust without watering it down. Now, some people would argue with the ending, he's kind of slapping a happy, optimistic ending on the end of it. He's watering down the subject matter a little bit. I don't agree with that, but yeah, I think sometimes that's what art does at its absolute best. You take a subject matter that nobody thinks they would want to sit through an entire movie about, and then he makes you sit through it because the drama is just that compelling and that engaging, and the artistry is so wonderful. Again, I think Klimov did a better job with Come and See. Come and See is a lot more brutal than Schindler's List, and Schindler's List is a brutal movie. But I don't think either films sugarcoat their incredibly difficult subject matters, so I think that's important. I wouldn't say I love Schindler's List, but I think, yeah, it deserves to be up here. Okay, number 20, Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Interesting, because we have another trilogy, and this is the third and last part of the trilogy. Again, kind of like The Human Condition, I think I prefer part one. I think I'd prefer Fellowship of the Rings, but I remember Fellowship of the Rings a lot more. I saw that movie a couple of times when it came out. It was a type of film that, like, we got it on DVD. We would, like, watch it over and over and over again, my, like, brothers and I. And then the only thing I really remember about Two Towers is that big fight scene or battle scene where they get the ladders and like that whole thing goes on for like 40 minutes. And Gollum, of course, makes his appearance in that movie, so that's memorable. And yeah, this is the one that ties it all off. I would not think this one would feature. I mean, I would not think that this one would be the highest ranked. You'd think number one would be the highest ranked, or even number two. I don't even remember this one that much. I kind of remember the ending, but yeah, okay, it's fine. I don't think either films are great. I think they all look great, and the acting's really good. I mean, Ian McKellen's really great in all of these, and so is Viggo Mortensen, but okay, it's fine. Okay, so number 21, this is interesting. Number 21 is another Edward Yang film, and it's called A Brighter Summer Day. And because I've been getting into Edward Yang more and more recently, and I've been kind of going through his filmography, and I wanted to work my way up to this movie because, I knew, I had heard that this was kind of one of his magnum opuses, and this was like one of his masterpieces. This and Yi Yi are often hailed as his greatest films. I mean, obviously they're both this high up. And so I wanted to watch some of his earlier work to kind of prepare for this one. I was kind of building my way up to A Brighter Summer Day. And, yeah, I was a little disappointed by it. In fact, I would even say I was very disappointed by it. Overall, I liked the movie. So for those of you who don't know, it's 4 hours long. Most of Edward Yang's films are pretty long, and they're pretty jam-packed as well. But this one's 4 hours long. I just thought it really dragged on for way too long. I think it easily could have been like under 3 hours. I'm not one of those guys who's like, oh, it's too long, you have to cut it down. Don't make us sit through a movie this long. I think if you want to make a 4 hour movie, go ahead and make a 4 hour movie. And if you're as good as Edward Yang, you've earned the right to make a 4 hour movie. From my understanding, it's very autobiographical. It's about his time growing up in rural Taiwan, going to high school, and I don't know, I just get the feeling sometimes when these directors make these very autobiographical films, they're so focused on recalling exactly what happened and exactly what they went through and how it made them feel that they sometimes forget to put a spin on it. They forget to kind of they worry so much about making it accurate that they kind of forget to make it more like entertaining or to, make the drama. Sometimes I think these directors are better when they're working with fiction, when they come up with a fake story. And yeah, I don't know. There was just something about it. I was pretty bored when I was watching it, and it just like kept going on and on and on. And I didn't think the characters were quite as unique or original as most of his characters are. Usually his stories are what really draw me in. Especially his story in like Terrorizer. That movie is just such a like labyrinth to get through. Where this one, I didn't find its portrayal of gang violence all that gripping. Yeah, I was quite disappointed by it. Yeah. I'm gonna move on to number 22. This is another movie I have not seen. 22 is a Neon Genesis uh, evangelical film. I didn't say that right. Anime film, haven't seen it. I believe this is based on a TV show. Haven't seen it. Gonna skip out. Okay, number 23. We have another Kobayashi film, and this is The Human Condition 1, No Greater Love. So this is the first part. I wonder where part 2 is. This is the first part of the Human Condition trilogy. Again, I kind of already talked about this. This is actually my favorite of the three. Really excellent performance by Nakadaya. I feel like I already talked about this movie, so I'm going to move on to number 24. This is another recent film. This is Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I was a big fan of this movie. Yeah, I feel like this film and Parasite, they were both technically 2019 films, but they probably came out like, I think they both premiered at Cannes, and they came out like maybe 6 months apart. Yeah, I was a really big fan of it. I also think, unless I'm wrong, this is the first female-directed movie to appear on the list, and the film really just focuses on the 3 female characters, so it's a very female-centric movie. Boy, what can I say that hasn't been said about this movie already? Well, the performances are all really great. I still remember seeing this in theaters and just being totally entranced by it. Yeah, lovely film. It was interesting, I'll say this, because, like, this film came out in 2019, and it came out the same year as this Russian film called Beanpole. And I feel like the success of this movie kind of overshadowed Beanpole, and it was kind of becoming like a trope at the time to have these films. It was becoming a trope at the time to have movies about like period piece lesbian dramas. I think even like SNL did a skit on it, and Beanpole was another well, I mean, you can debate, but like lesbian period piece movie. That one is set in Russia, and it takes place in the kind of weeks after World War II. And I prefer Beanpole. I actually thought the directing was a lot more interesting. I think the story was a lot more interesting. I don't think we're going to see Beanpole on this list. But yeah, I think Portrait of a Lady on Fire kind of overshadowed it a little bit because they were both period piece lesbian movies. Very different films. I'm not saying that they're all that similar. I'm just saying I think Portrait kind of overshadowed that one a little bit. But yeah, and the director, I've seen a couple of her other movies. I was actually really disappointed by Petite Maman. I did not understand the appeal of that film at all. So, and I've only ever seen this and that and Girlhood. So I think she's a fine director. I think years from now, people are going to point at Portrait of a Lady on Fire and say it's her masterpiece. And I do think it's a great movie. 24 is a little high for my taste, but okay. 25, we have another Kurosawa film, and this is probably my favorite Kurosawa movie. I also think it might be my favorite Japanese film. This is Akiru. I think this was the first Kurosawa movie I ever saw. I was really young when I saw this movie. I was probably 16. I might have seen this even before Seven Samurai, and I was just, really just blown away by it. It's a beautiful movie. If you don't know, it is about, it's a very simple story. It's about an old man dying. It's an old man in Japan, finds out he has cancer, and you just kind of follow him the last couple of weeks of his life. It's incredibly poignant. Really wonderful lead performance. I'm not going to attempt to say the actor's name. Yeah, beautiful movie. I'd say my favorite Kurosawa film. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna grab some water, so hold on real quick. What's next? Number 26. Number 26 is Whiplash. Okay, I think this movie's fine. Geez, a lot of people really, really love this movie. I think it's good. I'm not that crazy about Damien Chazelle. I like. Well, okay. Actually, I think Damien Chazelle has been going on the decline. Because this movie, I think it's a good movie. I have nothing against it. I think J.K. Simmons gives a really fantastic performance, and the story is compelling. Then La La Land is. I wonder even if La La Land is on this list. La La Land I thought was good, pretty overhyped. And then First Man I thought was like fine. I oddly I don't think it matched up with his style of filmmaking at all. Kind of underwhelmed by that. And then I thought Babylon was just like a huge piece of shit. I didn't think that movie was very good at all. I wrote a Letterboxd review on that movie, and you can check that out. I think I did a pretty good job of summing up exactly how I feel about Babylon. But Whiplash is fine. This is the type of movie where I was in film school when this came out, and I feel like people just like went a little bonkers over this movie. People were very quick to call this film a masterpiece. I don't think it's a masterpiece. I know the script gets studied a lot in screenwriting classes. And yeah, I think it's good, perfectly whatever. Okay, number 27. So this is a big one, and I'm actually surprised that this is all the way down at 27, because for a while this was number 1. 27 is Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, our current Best Picture winner. I also wrote a Letterboxd review about this movie where I think I did a good job of summing up exactly how I feel about Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. It's, I think my line from that was that it's not a Marvel film, but it just wants to be a Marvel film. It's kind of like a Marvel film disguised as an art house film. It's just, I mean, and especially because we were talking earlier about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, this is just kind of the same thing. It's another multiple universe jumping movie. When I went into this movie, I saw it in theaters, and when I went into it, I thought, okay, it was currently ranked number 1 on Letterboxd. So, when you go into a movie thinking, okay, everyone right now is calling this the greatest film of all time, you don't know where to put your expectations, because you think there's almost no way it's going to live up to that hype. But then you also think, oh, but wow, I'm probably going to be blown away by this movie. I wasn't blown away by it. There are things I really like about it. There are moments I really like about it. And then there are other moments, especially in the second half, that I just thought were really poorly done. I think that Ratatouille joke just went on and on and on and on. But, there's also a lot this is another thing. I didn't say this in my original review, but when people ask me, like, what I have against this movie, I think this is it. There's not a single moment of subtlety in this entire film. So, I'm not saying all movies have to be subtle. Sometimes movies, I like it sometimes when movies are over the top and in your face and, a real tour de force. But every movie should have, like, a little bit of subtlety. It should either have, like, a performance that's kind of subtle, or at least a few moments of subtlety. Nothing. There's no subtlety. Everything is just banging you over the head, with its meaning and its purpose and just everything. And also, like, yeah, the movie's crazy and wild and it takes all these twists and turns, but, like, I don't know. I think it could have been, like, a little more crazy and a little more wild. And, I wasn't shocked by any of the content. There's a scene where, like, I don't even remember exactly the setup, but there's a part of that movie where the main character has to shove an object up a guy's ass in order to... I don't remember, but if you've seen the movie, you remember that part. They have to shove some object up a guy's ass. And so they do it. This guy takes off his pants and they shove the object up his ass. And they pixelated the guy. And to me, that just says, okay, we're willing to, like, set up this, we're going to shove an object up a guy's ass, but we're going to pixelate it. And so to me, that just says we're not going to really go through. We don't have the guts or the gaw to really like go through with it and show you an object going up someone's ass. And I just remember thinking, God, who wants to see a pixelated image in a movie? That just seemed really... It's like they're censoring themselves. I don't know. And then again, that Ratatouille joke just went on and on and on. And, you know, it sweeped at the Oscars, which, okay. Whatever. I'm glad it's not number 1 anymore. You know, it's in the top 30, which, okay. I mean, a lot of people obviously really love it. I've spoken to a lot of people who feel this movie really spoke to them, and that's great. But I guess it just didn't speak to me. Okay, number 28 is... Now, this isn't a film I consider to be an absolute masterpiece. I'm very happy to see this movie so high up. It's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly by Sergio Leone. And I'm not even a big Western guy. My dad really loves John Wayne, and I never understood the appeal of John Wayne. Maybe I understand the appeal of John Wayne, but I don't like it. But this, I mean, Sergio Leone, he was brilliant. I mean, he made so many great films, and I think this is definitely his best film. I think this and, oh God, what's it called? Once Upon a Time in the West are his 2 ranking masterpieces. But I prefer this one a little bit more. And I used to own this DVD. Maybe I still do. But again, I saw this movie at a really young age, and, you know, it doesn't... Sometimes you need a couple of years of experience behind you of movie watching to really fully appreciate the artistry or the acting that goes into a film. Like, maybe I needed a little more appreciation before I watched Seven Samurai, but not this movie. It's just, this is the type of film anyone can enjoy it. Anyone can get something out of it. I mean, the score is just so good, too. Sometimes I'll just, like, listen to the score on YouTube. Or I'll watch the opening sequence, because the animation is actually quite poorly dated from the opening sequence, but it's a lot of fun to watch. Yeah, really great movie. Number 29 is another fantastic movie that I'm very happy to see is this high up. Number 29 is La Haine. I don't even know the director that well. I think this is the only movie I've seen from this director. Kind of considered a bit of a one-hit wonder, but this is a fantastic film. It's cool because it's kind of, it's this gangster film set in France in the 1990s, but it's like kind of a throwback a little bit to, the type of filmmaking that happened in Paris during the, French New Wave. You know, they shot the movie on black and white film, and, a lot of the, like, camera angles and, lenses that he uses are really reminiscent of that time. But so it's got this throwback quality, but also it's just like a very 90s movie. The opening scene has it's like the French version of Fuck the Police, but like, oh God, what's it called? But it's like wrapped in French, and there's like this other French song that's kind of mixed in with it. So it has a very 90s feel to it. And then Vincent Cassel, I hope I'm saying that right. He's the lead actor. Really great performance. I think this is the film that kind of made him a star. And great French actor. He pops up in a lot of stuff. Okay, number 30 is The Empire Strikes Back. And did you know this was not directed by George Lucas? I actually did know that, but I didn't know the director's name. Yeah, I think this is the best of the Star Wars movies, and, I don't, like, love Star Wars. I'm not too crazy over it, but, a lot of people do love Star Wars, and, I think it is, compared to most of the big sci-fi franchises, I do prefer Star Wars over, a lot of other stuff, and even if you compare it to the fantasy franchises, the Lord of the Rings movies are a little more consistent, but, like, I would take Star Wars over Lord of the Rings any day. And then number 31, we have another movie I haven't seen. This is Perfect Blue. I've been meaning to check this movie out. But again, it's not like streaming. Oh no, okay, you can watch it on Amazon. Okay, I'll watch this movie soon. But I'm gonna move on. Number 32, There Will Be Blood. Yeah, this is definitely a masterpiece. And it's not even. I like Paul Thomas Anderson a lot. Like, I like pretty much all of his movies, but like, sometimes I think, not him so much, but I think some of his films are a little overhyped. Like, I think Magnolia is a really good movie, but like, a lot of people say it's like one of the greatest films of all time. I mean, Phantom Thread, I actually thought I was a little underwhelmed by Phantom Thread. I was expecting a little bit more from him. Punch Drunk Love, I think is a really good movie, but like, a lot of people will use the word masterpiece to describe that. They'll say it's like one of the greatest films ever made. I'm not that high on it at all. The Master, I really, I have such mixed feelings about The Master. I think the acting is some of the best acting ever put on film. But like, the story, I think, has some holes in it. It doesn't pack the punch I think it was trying to pack, but there will be blood. This is, I mean, he really, I guess you could say he struck oil with this movie. This is, I think it's probably one of the best, certainly one of the best American films to have come out in the 2000s. And again, just the performances are so, I mean, Daniel Day-Lewis is phenomenal. It's a great ad for method acting, I'll say that. I know a lot of people like to shit on method acting, but he's fantastic in this. And then, of course, and even Paul Dano, I don't think gets the credit he deserves. I mean, I think we all are on the same page with Paul Dano. He's really great, but man, is he fantastic in this movie. I would even say he's almost as good as Daniel Day-Lewis. And it's just, you have these two powerhouse performances, and they're just like crashing into each other in multiple scenes, and it's incredibly exciting to watch. Okay, yeah, number 33, another really great film and another animated film. Number 33 is Grave of the Fireflies. Yeah, I watched this movie for the first time maybe 2 or 3 years ago now. It actually has a lot more in common with Come and See. I think they're both great movies, but because Come and See is about this, obviously this little kid surviving Russia during World War II, and this is about two kids, I think like a teenage boy and his sister, surviving Japan during the final weeks of World War II, I believe. A really exquisite film, and I'm not even like the biggest anime fan, but this is one of those anime movies where you kind of forget it's anime because you just get so involved and wrapped up in the drama. Really beautiful film. Sad, but quite bearable. Not nearly as intense as something like Schindler's List or Come and See, obviously. And then we're going to move on. 34 is a movie that's actually really important to me. Number 34 is Cinema Paradiso from 1988. This movie was a big deal for me because I saw this film in high school. I actually, I went to a high school that offered a lot of courses that I realized most high schools didn't offer. And I took actually not just one, but a number of cinema studies classes at my high school. And one of the first movies I watched in one of the classes was this one. I'd never even heard of it. And it's interesting because it's one of those movies where like it's very critically acclaimed, but you actually don't hear people talking about it as much as they talk about other films that are as critically acclaimed as this one. Possibly because the director hasn't had a great career. I mean, he's had a successful career. He's made some other good movies. Not on the same level as this one, but I actually haven't seen a ton of his movies. But he's not a Scorsese. He's not a Kobayashi. He's not a Paul Thomas Anderson. So when you have a director who doesn't have a really solid filmography, people aren't going to talk about him as much. But Cinema Paradiso was a big deal for me because I saw it in high school, so we broke it up over the span of a couple of days, but I don't know, I think it was one of the first times I saw a movie that really opened my eyes to just how emotionally powerful a film can be. And I remember watching that ending, and I rarely say this about a movie, but the ending really, really got to me. And I remember when it ended and like the credits started rolling, I remember thinking like, oh no, like I could just sit here and watch this for another 2 hours. Like, why did it have to end? Like, why did it have to be that short? And it's not a short movie. So yes, Cinema Paradiso holds a very special place in my heart. Um, and I haven't seen it since. I should rewatch it. Number 35 is Ran from 1985, directed by Kurosawa. Um, I also have kind of mixed feelings about this movie because obviously I'm a big Kurosawa fan, but I think he had a, I don't want to call it a peak, but he had a streak throughout his career where I think he was at like the height of his power, and that streak lasted a long time. It went from like Rashomon, which is 1950, all the way through like the early 1960s, and that's when he was really making his best work. And obviously, he continued to make movies for a really long time. And Ran was, I guess, kind of considered a bit of a comeback for him. As he got older, he started to slow down a little bit, and Ran is just like this really big, epic samurai film where he re-collaborated again with Tatsu Nakadai, who's playing a very old man. He's wearing a lot of makeup in this movie. I don't love the movie as much as I love a lot of his other films. I don't think it sort of feels like Kurosawa playing like his hits, you know. You want to hear something new, you want to hear something like original, but they're just like covering all their old hits. And I don't think it hits quite as hard. It doesn't leave the same impact as a lot of his earlier work, especially something like Yojimbo. But I don't know, I feel like when it came out, I feel like a lot of people were really like celebrating it and praising it because they were like, yeah, Kurosawa, he still got it. In a lot of ways, it's sort of like, it's kind of how I felt about Scorsese's The Irishman, you know, where he was just like covering all the hits, very familiar territory, instead of making something that felt very like new and original and like totally organic. This one just kind of felt like a copy of of his earlier work. It's still a good movie. It looks great, and the acting's really good. But for me, it didn't leave the same impact as something like Yojimbo or High and Low. 36. We have our first Tarkovsky movie, Stalker. Well, yeah, I have again a kind of complicated history with Tarkovsky. I'll say this. Out of all the movies that could have been his highest on this list, I'm glad it's this one. My favorite film of his actually might be Ivan's Childhood, which, you know, some people are like, oh, you know, that was his first movie. It doesn't really have his style or his... I think that's kind of what I like about it. Yeah, no, I respect Tarkovsky a lot, and I've seen a lot of his movies. I respect him. I think he was obviously genius. There are some ideas he has about cinema that I don't agree with. He was kind of famous for saying that he wants his films to bore people, and we can debate for hours exactly what he means by that, and you know, what it means to be bored while watching a movie versus what it means to have your patience tested. I'm totally okay with my patience being tested. In fact, sometimes I like it when my patience is tested. There are a lot of directors who make what I call slow burning films. And I think those movies are wonderful, and I love the slow pace of it, and I love the kind of IV drip of information we're getting from each little scene. But Tarkovsky, I think his films just kind of go on and on and on, and I often don't see a point to what he's saying. I know this is a pretty radically unpopular opinion, but yeah, a lot of his movies just like don't do it for me. I appreciate them. I think they all look amazing. I've always said if you opened a museum and just filled it with still images of Tarkovsky movies, I would spend all day in that museum just looking at his images. But do I want to sit down and watch a movie that just like very slowly goes through those images and like there's very little dialogue and not a lot happens? And no, often not, but I do like Stalker. Stalker, I think, makes some pretty interesting points, and I think the characters are pretty interesting, and it's not too long. I mean, it's over 2 hours, but 160 minutes, that's not too bad for some of his other films. Some of his other films just like kind of drove me insane with how slow they were, and they're just so tedious to get through. I didn't find Stalker too tedious to get through. So yeah, and I think also visually it might be his best looking film. So there you go. 36 is Stalker. 37 is a movie that I like. It's The Handmaiden, Park Chan-wook. And this is the first Park Chan-wook film on this list. It's also the first Korean film we've gotten in a while. People seem to really love this movie. And it's a lot higher than Old Boy, which I find disappointing. I think Park Chan-wook has made multiple phenomenal films. I think his absolute masterpiece is Old Boy. I think this movie's really good. I don't know. It didn't click with me as much as it clicked with a lot of other people. I remember being a little disappointed by the finale. One thing I really love about Park Chan-wook is just how sick and demented he can be. And I'm enjoying his movies the most when he's being really sick and really demented and just like no boundaries. I think that's when he really shines, and there's not a single boundary in Old Boy. Where this one, I think maybe had a few boundaries, and I thought the ending was a little anticlimactic. I was maybe a little just, I don't know, disappointed by it. I mean, it's a perfectly good movie. Again, I'm saying a lot of negative things about a movie that I like a lot. I just don't think... In fact, on my Letterboxd account, if you look at my 2016 list, I don't even think this is in the top 10. I think it might have been in my top 15, but so I didn't even think it was one of the best movies of 2016. But yeah, Old Boy for me is his masterpiece. Number 38, In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai. Yeah, I totally approve. This is a masterpiece. I think it really deserves to be on this list and high up on this list. I think the story is really fantastic, and like what an unusual way to approach a love story. And what great acting too. Maggie Cheung, and I mean Maggie Cheung is just fantastic in this, and I've been trying to watch more Maggie Cheung movies because she was really something amazing, and I think most of the films I've seen of hers were the ones that she did with Wong Kar-wai. And Wong Kar-wai, again, he's one of those guys who I think a lot of young filmmakers discover him earlier on. He's someone you might get to like before you get around to Tarkovsky, because his films are they have more of a pop to them. They're not tedious to sit through. And just the emotions are just like, I mean, he just like rips your heart apart. They're so beautifully shot, and the acting is also amazing. Maggie Cheung is fantastic in this. It's not my favorite Wong Kar-wai movie, but it is a great Wong Kar-wai movie. And then 39, we have our first Ingmar Bergman film. 39 is Persona, which is... Again, I don't know if it's my favorite Bergman film, but it is a great Bergman film. This is, of course, Bibi Andersson and Liv Ullmann, two great actresses, stuck on an island, and they're both a little off, we'll say, both a little off. And yeah, I remember when I was in college once, I went to film school, and someone was doing a report on Bergman, and yeah, I didn't even like put this together, but they said, yeah, like, how do you know it's a Bergman film? Well, if it's about a mentally ill person on an island, it's a Bergman film. And he was right. A lot of Bergman films, he just made a bunch of movies in a row that were all about mentally ill or like very disturbed people on an island. And you don't even realize that when you're watching them, because like, yeah, that basic setup is always the same, but the execution is quite different. And oh god, what's that one really good one? Hour of the Wolf or Time of the Wolf? Crap. Yeah, he made a couple of these. So he made a couple of mentally ill people stuck on an island. Persona is probably the best. It's very experimental, artsy, but it also still feels like your classic narrative film. It's not too experimental. I remember the monologues in this movie are what really makes the film shine. They're quite amazing. Um, and also just like the acting is great. Liv Ullmann gave so many great performances in a bunch of these movies. Uh, that's no exception. Number 40 is one a film that I'm really not that crazy about. Number 50, where are we? 40 is Sunset Boulevard, and directed by Billy Wilder. I am a Billy Wilder fan, but I don't know. This movie is very, very 1950s America. I am not a huge fan of most of the cinema that came out of Hollywood in the 1950s. Not my cup of tea. Like I like most Billy Wilder films, but like people like Douglas Sirk and Nicholas Ray. Maybe we'll talk more about this later if one of their movies pops up on the list. I don't know. Sunset Boulevard. It's a really interesting concept, and I think there's stuff about the movie that I like. I think it's just very dated. It's a very old, outdated film. It's hard not to watch the movie and chuckle a little bit. And you're not supposed to laugh at Sunset Boulevard. It takes itself very seriously. Yeah, I just think it comes across as so melodramatic, and I think, I understand that Gloria Swanson's performance is supposed to be a little outdated, and it's supposed to be a little hokey, and it's supposed to be maybe even a little campy, but I don't think the film fully utilizes it that well. Yeah, not too crazy about this one. Never have been. Again, I saw this movie really early on when I first started to get into cinema, so I was probably like in high school. I'm a big fan of a lot of other Billy Wilder movies. Not this one. And I'm actually surprised it's this high up because I feel I've rewatched parts of that movie recently, and I think it's very poorly dated, which is not the case with a lot of these other older films. Number 41 is Apocalypse Now. Sorry if the sound of me drinking drives you nuts. When I was in college, my producing professor produced this movie, and he had so many great stories about if you know anything about Apocalypse Now, they just went through hell making this film. I think the story of making Apocalypse Now is actually maybe a little more interesting than the film itself. I like the movie a lot. I think there are great things in it. It's been a while since I've seen it, and so maybe my memory of it is a little foggy, but I do remember really liking the lead performance by, who was this? Martin Sheen. He's very good. And there are certain sequences that are fantastic, like obviously when the helicopters are flying into that village, and what song is playing that? Like Beethoven's song, I believe, or maybe it's, I don't know, I think it's Beethoven. That's a great sequence. There's also, all I remember is at one point Martin Sheen like wanders off into the jungle and he's attacked by, I think, a jaguar. That's just a fantastic sequence because like you just look into the forest and you see like pure darkness, or I guess it's the jungle, pure darkness, and you can like kind of see the jaguar's eyes, and then you just hear its roar, and then it jumps out of like pure pitch blackness. It's a really fantastic sequence, and there are a couple of really fantastic sequences. I think the general consensus about Apocalypse Now is that the ending is quite unextraordinary, and they didn't. Francis Ford Coppola will even admit that like they did not have that ending figured out before they went to go shoot it, and I think that shows. It doesn't come together very well, but it is a must watch, and again, I saw this movie a very long time ago. My memory is not that clear, but it does hold a little bit of a special place for me because of that wonderful professor I had who he had all these great stories about like having to deal with Dennis Hopper on set, who was going through a huge cocaine binge at the time. So those were funny to listen to. Okay, 42 is another Tarkovsky film that is Andrei Rublev. I have not seen this. I started it once just because I wanted to check it out. I actually think I would like the movie if I saw it, but I got a little bit into it, didn't finish it. We'll watch it one day. Okay, number 43 is another Japanese film from, again, like this golden age. I call it the golden age of Japanese cinema. This is called Woman in the Dunes. This is a really fantastic movie. I wouldn't put it this high up, but I think it's an acceptable answer. Or I think it's acceptable to have it this high up. Okay, so Woman in the Dunes. Woman trapped in the dunes. Guy gets tricked into going down into the dunes with her, and then pretty much he's kind of like held hostage there by these I don't even remember. I don't remember the exact setup, but I can't even remember why they trap him down there. I guess they just like kidnapped him or something. But it is quite a claustrophobic movie. Again, I wrote a really lengthy Letterboxd review, but I don't want to just read my Letterboxd review. But you can read that if you want my deeper thoughts on Woman in the Dunes. Again, I wouldn't have it this high up, but it is definitely one of the best of the Japanese films from this time period. Moving along to number 44, that is The Passion of Joan of Arc by Carl Theodor Dreyer from 1928. I have seen this movie. I actually got to this movie kind of late. I have a lot of, I mean, like most people, I have certain holes in my film history of like what I have and have not seen, but I have a lot of holes when it comes to silent films. I've seen most of the classics, most of the like really big named ones. This is also the first silent film on this list, right? Yeah, this is the first silent film on this list. It is a really great movie. I mean, it looks fantastic. I don't know if you can totally judge a silent films by the same standards that you would judge any other non-silent film, but for silent film standards, it is really fantastic. And I've seen a couple of other Carl Theodor Dreyer movies, and I like them. All of his films just look amazing. He was a real artist with like framing, and the set designs of his movies are always amazing, and there's always this really specific and powerful tone to every single one of his films, and The Passion of Joan of Arc certainly has it. He made another film in the 60s. He made films for a very long time, but he made another film in the 60s. It was one of his last movies called Gertrude, which is a very powerful and very touching love story, and if you haven't seen that one, and if you've seen The Passion of Joan of Arc, you should check out Gertrude. I don't have a lot to say about it. It's a fantastic looking movie, and it's nice that it's so short. It's only about 80 minutes long, and it is 80 minutes of just like really one big emotional punch after the other. It's really hard. I mean, it feels like you're watching a moving painting. That's just how exquisite it looks, and even like it's quite impressive how intense so many of the close-ups are. I mean, because it's actually funny because they have that line in Sunset Boulevard where she was like, we didn't need words, we had faces. And there's some truth to that. I mean, they just, the way they shot faces back then were crazy powerful, and the way he shoots his lead actress is really extraordinary. Those images are just kind of burned in your mind. And also the images of all the men in the courtroom kind of judging her and looking at her, also just very powerful stuff. Here we go. Number 45. The Human Condition 2. And it's called Road to Eternity. Okay. I don't even remember. These three movies kind of blend in together. I remember the first one really specifically. And if you've seen The Human Condition 1, I specifically remember the moment where they have all those prisoners on the train, and they just open the door, and the prisoners just like fall out like pieces of lumber. They've just like turned these men into like almost lifeless objects, and they just all come falling out. And I can't even remember the specifics of part two, so obviously it maybe didn't have that huge of an impact on me, but I think a lot of people maybe haven't gotten around to the human condition yet, because it's quite a commitment. It's three very long movies, but yeah, it's definitely worth your time. I kind of spread them out, and maybe that was a bit of a mistake. I watched like one, and then I waited like 2 or 3 weeks, and I watched the second one, and then I waited like another 3 or maybe 4 weeks to watch the third one. And but I eventually got through all of them. Maybe try to watch all of them in like a 2-week span, I would recommend, just so you don't forget anything. And that way it'll feel maybe a little bit more like a singular experience if you watch all of them in a shorter time frame. But they're definitely worth your time. I wouldn't put either of these three that high up on my list, but it's worth something. Okay, number 46 is actually a Bergman film I have not seen, Autumn Sonata. So I'm going to skip that. 47 is another film I haven't seen. Macario, I'm probably saying that wrong. So I'm going to skip that too. 48 is a film I have not seen. I haven't seen a ton of Ozu films, and number 48 is his most famous film, Tokyo Story. From what I've seen of Ozu, I like his movies. I've only seen, I think... Oh, wow. I think I've only seen 2 of his movies. I've seen Late Autumn... Oh, God. I can't even remember the names of them, because they're all seasons and they all kind of mix together. I think one of them was Late Autumn. So I don't love him as much as some people love him. I know some people really, really go hard for Ozu. I have not gotten around to Tokyo Story yet. I'm going to one day. I kind of, with Edward Yang, I want to build my way up to Tokyo Story. I want to see a couple of his films before I get to this one, which is considered his masterpiece. So I'll get there eventually. 49 is Princess Mononoke, which I have not seen. I'll get to it eventually. Number 50 is a movie I really, really love, and that is Paris, Texas. And this is, this is probably my favorite movie of the 1980s. And I am a pretty big Wim Wenders fan. Oh boy, where to start with this film? Well, it was written by Sam Shepard, who was a really exceptional playwright. And he wrote this really awesome play called Buried Child that I think everyone should check out if they can. Just even if you just want to read it, it's a wild play. And he wrote some pretty wild films as well. And Paris, Texas is so interesting because like it just has this great, not just American, but it has like this very specific Texas feel to it. It's like it's probably one of the best films to just like capture that specific part of America, that specific part of rural kind of desert America, which I've only spent a little bit of time in those places, but he really captures the mood and the feel and even like the colors of that world very well. And it's interesting because Wim Wenders made such interesting films about America, but he was not American, he was German. But you're getting like an outsider's perspective, and sometimes an outsider's perspective is actually can be a lot more poignant and observant than someone who is from that region and really knows that area. Because, sometimes if you grew up in a place and you know it really well, you start to stop seeing what makes it so special and what makes it so different. And so there are all these stories about Wim Wenders like road tripping across America, and I think he really saw and picked up on things that the average American maybe might not appreciate. And also he's, the king of the road trip movies. I also saw he's got a new movie premiering at Cannes, which is very exciting. He hasn't done well, I guess he's been mostly doing documentaries in the past couple of years, but it's exciting to see him doing another feature film. And I just love Paris, Texas, and Harry Dean Stanton, Natasha Kinski all give the last portion of the film where he's talking to her through the one-way mirror is it's just some of the best filmmaking I think ever put in a movie. Number 51 is Do the Right Thing. Yeah, I do. This is also a great film. Um, Shockingly relevant even today. Spike Lee, and I'm not even the biggest Spike Lee fan. Um, I think I've yet to see a Spike Lee movie that I dislike. I walk away from a lot of his movies thinking, okay, yeah, that was something else. I do like some of his newer stuff though. We're seeing a little bit of a Spike Lee comeback after the Black Klansman, and that's nice to see. Yeah, this is, from what I've seen, this is hands down his best movie. And again, it looks really great. It's incredibly poignant, very observant when it comes to like racial tensions. It's just got like a great like mood and atmosphere to it. It's got a really good style, and I think the big complaint about Spike Lee is that sometimes his style is just like he tends to value style over substance, and it's a little too in your face. And I can agree with that with some of his other films, but I think in Do the Right Thing, he finds just the right balance. And yeah, I do think it's miles ahead of a lot of his other movies. Yeah, it's definitely his masterpiece. 52 is Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. From 2002, directed by Peter Jackson. I don't have a whole lot else to say about this movie. I like these movies. They were a big part of my childhood because, again, like my brothers and I would just like get them on from Blockbuster back in the old days and watch them kind of on repeat. And I think I mentioned this earlier, that battle sequence with there's a name for it. It was called like the battle at something, but when the orcs get all those ladders and they start going up, that's a great. I think I might even have more memories of playing the video game. So we'll move on. Okay, number 53. I actually mentioned this one earlier. Howl's Moving Castle from 2004. This is another animated Miyazaki film. Yeah, I think I do prefer. Well, I don't know. Maybe this one and Spirited Away are kind of neck and neck. But Miyazaki, he's got a lot of movies so far in this list. I don't think I have anything else to say about it, though. I mean, it looks great. The animation is, yeah, really fantastic. I really like the story, too. Again, don't hate me, but with these anime films, I tend to watch the English dubbing. I don't often watch English dubbings for foreign films. I don't approve of that. But for anime, I kind of give myself a pass just because I think the voice actors actually put a lot more effort into dubbing anime films. And I just remember Lauren Bacall, who has a great voice and should have done a lot more voice acting. She does a voice in Howl's Moving Castle. She's like the old lady, or maybe she's an old witch or something, and she's very good in it. I also think Christian Bale did a voice in it. But we're gonna move on. 54, Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. Oh, it's not plural. I would say this is actually probably my favorite of the Lord of the Rings movies. I don't remember Return of the King that specifically, but I think this was the best one. I wouldn't call it a great film, but I think compared to most of the other blockbusters from the 2000s, I think definitely a lot more. You can really tell Peter Jackson really poured himself and all of his creative juices into making these movies. It's quite an achievement. I wish he put more effort into making those Hobbit movies, which I really hated. Those movies suck. Okay, number 55 is, wow, and this is interesting because this is our first Kubrick film. Number 55 is Paths of Glory by Stanley Kubrick. I love Stanley Kubrick, and Stanley Kubrick, again, means a lot to me. Him and Tarantino, and I'm sure a lot of like young film enthusiasts kind of feel the same way. When you're young, you like first realize that, oh wow, there are these directors who are like geniuses, and like every movie they make is like really fantastic and superb, and you want to like, it's kind of like Pokemon, like you want to watch them all You want to like see everything in their filmography, and Kubrick's a great place to start because his films are epic and very well made, but like approachable. They're not like these difficult Tarkovsky movies that are, you know, kind of a chore to sit through sometimes. And you know, so yeah, I mean, I watched, I've now seen every Kubrick film. But you watch all of the big ones when you're like younger, when you're like first getting really into movies. You watch Doctor Strangelove and Clockwork Orange and Full Metal Jacket. And this one I got to a little bit later, Paths of Glory. I don't love it as much as I love his other films. I wouldn't use the word like masterpiece or great to describe it, but I also think I have to rewatch it though. It's been a really long time since I've seen this movie. It's probably been a couple of years, and I don't even remember it that well. I remember bits and pieces of it. I know it's about World War One. It's set in the trenches, but it's actually mostly about a trial. And I do remember the ending. I think most people know the German singer at the end is actually Kubrick's future wife, and that's how they met. That's a fun fact a lot of people know. Isn't that interesting, though? This is the highest ranked Kubrick film. And I don't agree with that at all. I think there are much more, far better Kubrick films. But again, I kind of feel like I want to rewatch this. Number 56 is Before Sunrise. We have another trilogy. And this is Richard Linklater, who, again, Richard Linklater, he kind of falls into the same camp with Kubrick and Tarantino, because he meant a lot to me, because like he was one of those guys who... You discover him when you're really young, and you realize, oh wow, like all of his movies are filled with all of this great conversational dialogue of these people just like sitting around talking, and there's a certain rhythm and flow to all of the talking in his movies, and you think, oh, you make the connections, isn't that great? And this is the first of the trilogy, and I'm a big fan of this movie, although I gotta say, I think Before Sunset is a lot better. I think Before Sunset, to me, is actually the best of the three. And people go back and forth over, like, what's the greatest. I know a lot of people who say Midnight is the best. I like Before Midnight a lot, but I don't think it's the best. I like this one a lot, too, although this one would probably be my least favorite. But, you know, I mean, again, not to say anything too negative about it, it's really great acting, really phenomenal dialogue. What city are they in? They're in Vienna. They're in Vienna, and you get to see a lot of Vienna, and you get to hear a lot of really great dialogue. And Julie Delpy is quite lovely in this. I'm a big fan of hers, and I like Ethan Hawke. I'm not crazy about him, but he's really good in this too. And this is actually, if you've never seen a Richard Linklater movie, this is probably this or Dazed and Confused is a pretty good place to start. Yeah, number 57 is a really fantastic movie that, I mean, it's ranked pretty high on this list, but I would actually argue that this is a really underrated film. This is Paul Schrader's Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, and I don't think a lot of people have actually seen this movie. This is one of those films where, kind of like Come and See, and it came out the same year as Come and See, 1985. I don't think it got a fair wide release. I don't think a lot of Americans had a chance to see this movie. It's one of those things where it's a Japanese film. It's set in Japan. It's about a guy who mostly is only known in Japan, Mishima, and but it's made. It was written and directed by an American director, Paul Schrader. And so maybe the Japanese didn't see it as like very authentic, and the Americans are thinking, oh, you know, especially in 1985, they're like, oh, it's a Japanese film, you have to read subtitles, and like it's about a Japanese guy who I've never even heard of, so like, why should I go see this movie? And you can't even, it's hard to track down a lot of reviews of the film from when it came out. Again, like Come and See, it's one of those movies that over the decades, I think especially the internet kind of helped to uncover this movie. And I know it's on the Criterion Collection too. It might be streaming on Criterion Channel. It's a great, great film. I'm shocked more people don't talk about this movie and that it's not constantly being hailed as the masterpiece that it is. But it's Paul Schrader. First of all, I think it's his best screenplay. and he's written a lot of, as we all know, fantastic screenplays. But it's the structure and the way he kind of jumps back and forth between the reality of this man and the fiction that he wrote. And it's so beautifully shot. People talk about Paul Schrader a lot, and they talk about his writing. And obviously, he was a great writer, and he wrote these great characters, these very disturbed male anti-heroes. That's kind of what he was known for. But also, his films, just like, they also look amazing too, and they're very well shot. And the framing and the composition is all really expertly done. And for some reason, people will always think of Paul Schrader as a writer first. I suppose that's because his most famous film was Taxi Driver, which he only wrote, that and Raging Bull. And for whatever reason, the films that he directed, while most of them are not as well, they're not as great as like some of his the ones that he only wrote, but God, they just look amazing. And recently I saw Light Sleeper, and even that is just superbly shot and superbly acted as well. So yeah, but for some reason, he will always be known as a screenwriter first, which I think is interesting because his work behind the camera is also really exquisite. And yeah, if you have not seen Mishima, that's one that I think it's really easy for that movie to fly under a lot of people's radars. Even if you're like a big film enthusiast like me, it's quite easy for that to fly under your radar. So check out Mishima if you haven't already. Okay, 58 is Satan Tango. Santa Tango? Is that how you say it? Bellatar. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any Bellatar movies yet. One day I will get to Bellatar, but I have not gotten to him yet. 59 is... Oh God, how do you help me say this? Apur Sansar. Apuru Sansar, I think. This is part of the Apu trilogy. Oh God, I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce. I watched this recently though. So this is directed by the Indian filmmaker Ray. He made a trilogy. Again, it actually has a little bit in common with The Human Condition, where he took this very, very popular Indian novel and he made it into 3 films. It's kind of about this kid just growing up in India, and they're played by 3 different actors throughout the 3 different movies. It has a little bit of a Boyhood feel to it, just in terms of you're just watching this kid grow up, but it has more of a plot than Boyhood. It's not quite as meandering as Boyhood, but also the 3 movies, they kind of go together, but you can also you can watch them as 3 separate films. It's interesting because, like The Human Condition, I thought part 3 was the weakest, and I'm surprised that part 3 is so high up, because I thought it was hands down not nearly as impactful or as memorable as parts 1 and 2. I think part 1 is the best, and I'm not going to attempt to say. At one point in time, I knew how to pronounce all the titles of these 3 movies, but I don't anymore. Yeah, I thought part 1 works totally as a standalone film, where 2 and 3 don't. So that's interesting. Okay, and then I'm going to go on to number 60, which is The Thing. Yeah, let me take a sip of water. So, because I have a lot to say about The Thing. John Carpenter, I have an interesting relationship with John Carpenter. I love Halloween. Halloween is one of my favorite horror films. It's one of my favorite movies. I really grew up on that movie. And I like some of his other films. Some of his other films I hate. I have mixed feelings about The Thing. I think parts of it are really fantastic. The special effects are amazing. And who's the lead actor? Is it Kurt Russell? Yeah, gives a really strong performance. This is considered one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made. I mean, people love this movie. I don't know. I saw it I want to rewatch it because I watched it for the first time maybe like 4 or 5 years ago now, and it just didn't click with me for whatever reason. I don't know. It's interesting because most of his post-Halloween films don't feel like Halloween. They feel really different, and this one actually doesn't have a lot in common with Halloween. The tone's really different. The atmosphere is really different. I'm not saying all of his movies have to like feel exactly the same. He can mix it up a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. It just like it I didn't find the monster all that threatening. I didn't get wrapped up in the story as much as I think I should have, and I don't know. It just something didn't click with me. I kind of want to give it a second chance, though. There are some John Carpenter movies that I'm not going to give a second chance. I really hated They Live. I just thought that was a terrible movie. I'm kind of shocked at how many people like that movie. But again, like I think I like Escape from New York. I like Christine. Halloween, I think, is such a great. That's like to me, that's like a perfect horror film. It's just like the Jamie Lee Curtis is so great in that lead role, and the directing is all like when it comes to like setting up a jump scare and just like a suspense sequence. I think John Carpenter shows so much skill. Is Halloween gonna be on this list? No, that's too bad. But the Thing is, and I don't think The Thing. Again, I think I gotta give this movie a second chance. I've been itching to see this one again, so I'll probably do that soon. Okay, and then I'm gonna move on to number 61 is The Apartment by Billy Wilder. Now, here's a Billy Wilder film that I really love. It's interesting how varied his filmography is. But yeah, The Apartment, and it's not nearly as iconic as a lot of his other movies. Like, I don't think it gets mentioned as much as Double Indemnity or Sunset Boulevard for that matter. But this actually might be my favorite Billy Wilder film. It's just so sweet and so lovely. And it is like, it's like the gold standard of what every rom-com should be. And Jack Lemmon's really fantastic in this. I'm a big Jack Lemmon fan. Really great, kind of the perfect New Year's movie too, I think. Number 62 is a movie, I mentioned this one earlier, Old Boy, I've been talking for too long. Old Boy by Park Chan-wook. Yeah, I think this is his masterpiece. Totally unhinged. He's willing to go anywhere, and in the most shocking and appalling ways imaginable. Really fantastic performance by the lead actor. I should know his name. Chow Min-sik, maybe. Who's I've seen him in a number of South Korean films. He's also really great in I Saw the Devil. He gives just this amazing tour de force performance. Also, it's just one of those. It's so refreshing to see a movie that's like a genre piece, but you cannot predict where it's going, and you don't know what's going to happen next, and there are all these twists and turns, and there are so many brilliant twists and turns, and the ending to this movie is, oh yeah, it's just got, I don't want to give it away if you haven't seen it, but it's so disturbing and sick and brutal, and it's just like, sums up everything that South Korean filmmakers do great, that like a lot of American filmmakers just like can't get right, or they're just like willing to go places that like, and truth be told, I don't know if the average American film goer would even like go with this movie. I think they'd be so repulsed and put off by it. But yeah, Old Boy, I think might be my favorite South Korean film too, and that's saying something because there are quite a few. 63 is a movie I have heard of, but I have not seen. Le Tour, I don't know. I think that's French for The Hole. I haven't seen it, but it's been on my watch list for a while. And number 64, and is the movie I mentioned earlier. It's Eternity in a Day by Theo Angelopoulos. I just want to plug this again. I wrote an article on this movie, and the article was about Theo Angelopoulos, but I really went into detail on this film, and it was great because I got to interview Theo's biographer and one of the actor who plays the little boy in this movie. I got to interview him, and I put parts of the interview in this article. It's such a fantastic movie. It's just, I mean, when I saw this for the first time, I just couldn't believe that like I barely knew who this filmmaker was, and that people. I'm just so glad that a film like this is so high up on Letterboxd's top 250. I wish, again, it's not an easy film to get a hold of. Um, you can either do what I did and buy the DVD box set, or just like find somewhere to stream it illegally. But it's this beautiful poetic film about a man, a very old man. He's dying. He's sick. Most of the people in his life either just like don't have time for him. His wife has passed away years ago. The movie cuts back to his marriage with his wife, but then it's also really about this relationship he forms with this little boy. He's a homeless refugee living in the streets of I think Athens is where it takes place, and it's just really about like their relationship. You have this old dying man and this little boy who's just seen like the worst of humanity, being a refugee and not having parents to protect him and living on the streets. And the actor Achilles is his name. It was his first movie. He was like 8 years old, I think, when he shot it, and he just gives a wonderful performance. And the great German actor Bruno Gaines, who died, I think, within the last like year or two. But he was a really fantastic actor. Most people know him from portraying Hitler in that wonderful Downfall movie. And if you've seen the YouTube videos of Hitler reacting to stuff, that's him. That's Bruno Gaines. And totally unrecognizable. He looks nothing like Hitler in the movie. Giving a really powerful, deep performance. It's a really hard movie to put into words. It's just like totally exquisite, and you really feel like you're watching the world through the eyes of a man dying, because everything is so in focus and everything is so clear, and you just like see everything for what it is. And it's like a man who's been on the earth for so long, and he's finally seeing the world for what it is, and he's finally seeing all the beauty, but also all the pain and all the darkness. And it's just an exquisite film. Again, I might put the link down below to the article I wrote about it, and I got to interview all these people for it. Yeah, go check it out if you haven't seen it yet. And I wasn't sure how far I was going to get into this list, but I think I'm going to stop here at number 64. I think it's a good place to stop, because we're at Eternity in a Day, which is one of my favorite movies, and I have to go to the bathroom, and I've been talking for too long. And I might finish this later, but I'm going to stop now. How the hell do you turn this off?